Um, Now, as you will no doubt know, on the 7th of May, the British Conservatives won the UK elections. Subsequently, David Cameron started talks with other EU leaders on the UK and the EU. And due to the Danish elections, we unfortunately have not the pleasure of seeing Cameron here today, maybe here, I don't know. But the British question, as we have called it, will occupy the political discussions in the EU for some time ahead. There's no doubt about that. So, very welcome to this special session on the British question, Brexit, or another future inside the EU. And my name is, as Bjarke said, Jens-Peter, and I'm a senior advisor with the think tank Europe. For the next 40 minutes or so, we will discuss issues such as what does the UK competence review say, what will Cameron demand, and what will or can the rest of the EU give him. How can reluctance to treaty changes be overcome? How likely is a Brexit, and what would it eventually imply for the UK, for the EU, and also maybe for Denmark? And as we have here two very experienced persons. The first one to intervene will be a keynote from Michael Emerson from CEPS, the Center for European Policy Studies in Brussels. Michael is a former EC head of delegation, ambassador to Moscow, and he's a former director in the European Commission. Michael has produced numerous publications on European integration issues, on EU relations with the wider European neighborhood, and on contemporary European conflict areas. And Michael has recently edited a book on Britain's future, I also have it, in Europe. And we have also distributed an article done by Michael, which was down there when you came in, on Cameron's EU wish list. So please welcome Michael Emerson. Now, let me just take up 2 minutes more, because I'll also introduce the next speaker after Michael has done his keynote, which is Jens-Peter Bonde. Jens-Peter is a former member of the European Parliament from various EU skeptical parties. Jens-Peter has kindly, very kindly, on this day an hour ago, accepted to join us here to enlighten and live up the debate, no doubt, because Maya Kluge Rasmussen, who was supposed to be here working with the think tank, is unfortunately ill. Jens-Peter has a long time experience from the European Parliament, and he has been president of various Eurosceptical groups in the European Parliament. He also participated in both the conventions on the Charter and on the treaty. Right. So please welcome Jens-Peter also, and thanks a lot. Now, we start with you, Michael. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. As I was flying here yesterday, I was preparing to congratulate the organisers on the excellent timing, because Mr. Cameron was due to have breakfast with your Prime Minister this morning here in Copenhagen. However, Danish politics, I understand, intervened and made that impossible. So then I had the idea with the chairperson here that we might play a game. I might be Mr. Cameron, he might be the Danish Prime Minister, which could have been quite fun, but we decided against. Because no.
I'm not as beautiful as...
Speaking personally, I do not represent Mr. Cameron or the British government. I work for an independent think tank in Brussels. We've been working intensely on this Brexit question, as you will see, but from a strictly independent standpoint. Okay. When Cameron became Prime Minister 5 years ago, he engaged in a lot of rhetoric about having to get a new deal, new settlement. Things can't go on, status quo is no good, we need to renegotiate, repatriate, reform the European Union. Okay, so that was the rhetoric, and then, so Mr. Cameron, what do you really want? Because that is all high-up language. And the absolutely clear answer is that at this stage he did not know. He was being driven by political discourse of a populist type, but then he did one very sensible thing. He agreed with his coalition partner to investigate very, very carefully the substance of it. We call the balance of competence review. And the Tories, Eurosceptics, thought this would be an excellent opportunity to go through the whole rule book of the European Union and pick off those competences of the European Union that it would be a jolly good idea to repatriate back home. So this gigantic research project was set in motion, and it's a very good piece of work, and it's of more than British interest. I would say, Danes and others could do well to look at the published findings, and so I'm now going to go through them. We'll go through it because this is getting into how does this work in order to? Oh, it didn't work. Okay, so the key words there are the 3 R's: repatriation, renegotiation, and reform. And I'll come to the bottom line of this at the end as to which of these R's are still up and running. But to get the concepts clear, reform is about policy improvement of the EU as a whole. Renegotiation is getting special conditions for country X, UK, or if you like, Denmark. And repatriation is going into the Treaty of Lisbon and deleting competences for transport or whatever. So all of these 3 words have been in the political discourse of the Prime Minister. Okay, we go to reform first. This former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Lawson, said he moved to a Brexit position because the EU was unreformable. The UKIP party, Mr. Farage, also says the EU is unreformable. Is this true or not? Well, Carl Bildt does not actually agree, and he's a very experienced man. And if you go through past, present, and future, you have reform. Well, what is a reform? I mean, you can have policy improvement and you can have reform. They are overlapping categories. Reform is a rather grand word. Policy improvement is perhaps more practical. But okay, here we are. Here are 3 sectors where it's very interesting. The British government has interests and is actively in the business of promoting positive policy development, energy, digital, competition, financial markets. So okay, there's a lot to go for there. Now, okay. Now there's the great red tape argument that flows from the mouths of many distinguished politicians. I don't know if you talk about red tape, we'll hear later. But everybody likes to reduce red tape in general and Brussels red tape in particular. Okay, Mr. Cameron, we hear you on that. Absolutely no problem. the Juncker Commission has a new first vice president called Mr. Timmermans, who has the explicit mandate with considerable powers within the Commission for cutting Euro red tape, or in more precise Euro speak, to have the principle of subsidiarity more faithfully and properly administered. And I would say, we can go into the detail later if you like, but broadly speaking, I think Brussels, the Commission, has got beyond the point of being harmonizing maniacs, as is sometimes presented in the popular press. So this is an open door. Cameron, you have what you want there. Okay, so the reform ticket, we tick, yes, let's do it. Go ahead, and you've got a lot of things to do that you like. The UK, and where you can find allies in the rest of the European Union. Now, the renegotiation business, here it gets more tricky because the margin, in fact, is extremely limited, especially for the UK and for Denmark, because single market, they love it, so we don't want to renegotiate that. We want the other member states to do it more thoroughly. Schengen Euro opt-outs, they exist already. Justice and Home Affairs is opt-out, and I know this ties in with a particular Danish question. The UK have this extraordinary privilege with Ireland of not only being opted out, but having the right to opt back in on an ad hoc basis, item by item, at any point in time. Now, I understand that you're facing the prospect of a referendum to switch to basically this British position on that point, which I think is a good idea compared to your status quo. Right, what else can be renegotiated? Well, so the margin is very, very limited. You can indeed talk about the movement of persons, the labour market, and they've been talking even about this one, quitting the European Court of Human Rights, in the year that is celebrating the 800th anniversary of the Magna Carta. I think even some rather hard-bitten Tory MPs are now reaching the conclusion that that would not be a terribly good idea. So we skip that one. Now, movement of persons, this is really the only hardcore element where Cameron has declared his hand and said, I want to renegotiate. And I know there are concerns here too, and in other, say, relatively rich immigrant EU member states who have concerns here. Now, there are very easy things to do, and there are very difficult things to do in here. Now, this Dano ruling of the Court of Justice last year is very helpful, because this is reasserting, reconfirming national competence for deciding on who gets a residence status who are not necessarily employed. And that is of crucial importance, because if you're not a working person, you can only get welfare benefits if you are a resident. So the criteria here for residence, which you can control, is controlling access to welfare benefits for non-working migrants. Now I come to the working migrants, however, which is not here in this slide, but it's a large part of the debate now. The jargon for this is in-work benefits. Okay, the Pole who's working in the UK in a proper way, does he have access to healthcare? Yes, certainly. But does he also have access to social benefits like social housing, tax credits, R3 and child benefits? These are three of the items. Now here, Cameron seems to want to restrict that. And there he has a big problem, because that runs into the non-discrimination principle, which is very fundamental in the European Union. And so the question is it possible to negotiate something there for the UK, or for a change in the rules in general? This is an open question, but he'll have to tread very carefully indeed, if not to run into the brick wall of fundamental treaty principles. So I would like to see him concentrate more on the Dano ruling than on the in-work benefits, but that is what you have to watch. Okay, now we move on to the repatriation question. This is the extraordinarily interesting thing about the Balance of Competence Review. It's 32 volumes covering every EU competence. Now, this was good staff work done by civil servants, but the inputs to it was from anybody, civil society, business, academics. So it's an open invitation. Say what you want and what you think. And so there were 1,500 submissions of written evidence, some from the continent as well as from the UK. Very interesting, right at the beginning, when the first of them started being published. Oh, very interesting. Competent X, the conclusion was the balance of competences between the EU and the member states. In this area, most of them share the competences, is about right. Now, there's a lot of fine-tuning here in the relative balance between EU legislation and national legislation. Indeed, it can change over time. It does change over time. So those are the first results that came through. And this stuff was published over a year and a half. Then the further stuff came out, and by the time it came to the end of the 32 volumes, there was no EU competence that had been identified by the evidence submitted independently for which there was a solid case for repatriating that competence to the member states, i.e. deleting it from the Treaty of Lisbon. There was a lot to be done on the detailed second level of competences, but that's not a repatriation question. That, if you like, is a reform question. Yeah. Okay, I skipped the business. You can have all of this if you like, both in the book and if you can circulate the full set of slides, but I don't think we have time to go into the secession question, which, frankly speaking, will be a very big legal mess. But the overall findings are reform, yes, go ahead, the UK can do a good job there if it puts its mind to it. Renegotiation, a bit, but not much. And repatriation, forget it, because your own evidence, Mr. Cameron, if you ask for it, is that there's no case for it, and in any case the rest of the member states would not agree. So now we come to the Queen's speech this week. Our dear Queen, who's 80-something years old, is given a text by the Prime Minister, and she puts the crown on, as you've seen in the pictures, and has to read out the speech, and says, my government will do this and that. Well, on this question, she said, my government will have a referendum, okay, and will renegotiate, and will also engage in reform of the European Union for the benefit of all member states. Now, we don't know, I don't know exactly what what cards he is preparing to play are. We've got some idea, but don't know exactly. But what was quite interesting and significant about these few words in the Queen's speech is that repatriation was the dog that did not bark. It was not mentioned. So it is quite possible, I think actually very likely, that Mr. Cameron has actually absorbed the message from his Balance of Competence Review that this don't fly, and so he's dropped repatriation, much to the anger of his Europhobic Tory MPs, who would love to have a high-powered repatriation agenda because they know it would fail, and that would lead to a no in the referendum result. So this leaves Mr. Cameron still with a pretty nasty problem of carrying the whole of his party with him. So that's what politicians have to do. Right, so that's it really. We can go, if you like, but perhaps in the discussion time, into more the detail of what Cameron is asking for. There are lots of, I'll just list a few points, we'll discuss them if we want to. Ever closer union language. Red tape we've covered. Repatriation paths we've covered. Migration we've covered. Labour market, maybe something there. Be open to world trade, yes, we love it. Single market, yes, we love it. A flexible, adaptable European Union, yes, we love it. Enhanced role for national parliaments, yes, we like that. So this shopping list of his, with the exception of the migration point, given that he's evacuated repatriation, is in principle not that difficult and could lead into a constructive pro-reform movement in the European Union. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We have little time, so we will go straight away to you, Jens-Peter. Please stay, Michael, because we will then quickly start also the discussion. You can have a seat over there, Michael.
For me, it's very odd to be in front of a referendum where I have not planned a no campaign. But I was in Brussels to find out what was going on. I met with Juncker, my youth friend, Timmermans, my colleague from the European Convention, and Selmayr, the guy who decides in the Commission, above all of them, the Secretary General. And I also met with Nigel Farage, my old colleague, co-president. I had to inform him that we were not on the same side this time. It does not work. Now it does. And I'm sure that by the end of the day, we will have what Juncker called a fair deal for Britain. And it will not only be a fair deal for Britain, it will be a fair deal for all of us. And it will be a much better Europe which will come out of it, and it will settle the European question in Britain once for all. Think of the alternative if Labour had won. 10 years of battles and a referendum and a Brexit, because the Conservative Party would then have been in favour of a Brexit. Now you have Cameron as a leader who is a strong proponent of membership, and I'm sure he has already the deal with Merkel about the major content of the concessions. And I can go along with your list in many ways. There will not be very much repatriation. There may be one or two points of symbolic issues, but there will not be very much on content. But what will come is general reform in the European Union. And Juncker and Timmermans and Selmayr, they think that this is the last chance they have to reform the European Union before they lose contact with the voters everywhere, and before 250 Eurosceptics in the European Parliament will become 500 in the next elections. If they do not change the attitude of the way the European Commission have worked in the past. So Cameron's problem will not be Timmermans and Juncker. Their problem will be the opposition inside the European Commission, with your former colleagues, the Director Generals, who do not like the decentralization approach which they are running for. I met Juncker just after they had the meeting on the legislative program, where they had a big battle, and Juncker said without quotation, he felt after the meeting that the commissioners were instructed by their DGs and not the other way around. That's how he feels. And if you see the new draft proposal from Timmermans on better regulation, everything Britain could dream about is included in the document. Everything. It is there. It's for negotiation. But it will not be very popular in a lot of DGs in the European Commission. They hate that their powers are taken away from them. And for Juncker and Timmermans and Selmayr, they are convinced that if they do not do less and better, big on big issues, small on small issues, if they don't go this way, they are going to lose. If I shall suggest the result in the end to be short, then there will be a fair deal where there will be a lot for the national parliaments, and there is a lot to gain. Last year, 2014, the Danish parliament, the famous Danish parliament, gave a negotiating mandate for 35 legislative acts of the 2,358 legal acts adopted. 35. even in this country, where they believe that they control, there's a big room for controlling. If you take the European Parliament in 13, almost 700 trialogue meetings took place, where a few members of Parliament and members from the Commission, civil servants, basically did the laws in 90% of the cases with agreements in first readings, where the national parliaments were set aside, and where most members of the European Parliament was set aside as well. They was not aware of what was going on. This system cannot continue. This system is bound to explode when you will have cases on children's benefits and such things people are not aware being legislated around. So you need to reform that decision-making process, and they will do that. They're prepared to do that. The Commission is even prepared to deliver delegated acts to the scrutiny of the European Parliament and the national parliaments. So they will not find enemies in the Commission. They'll find enemies in the bureaucracies. Then the amount of European legislation is far too big. We have now 134,500 legislative acts, verdicts, standards, which cannot be amended by any parliament in any country. The problem is basically not the content on the regulation on fruit, on the size of strawberries. The problem is the consequence of these standards. There they should, that was my advice to them, they should establish a European Freedom Act where they change the consequence of adopting a European standard. They could say, for standards, not destroying the common market, not disturbing the common market, there we allow Poland to keep their slaughterhouses against European standards. Why should we kill them now? On fruit, why should we apply fruit standards, strawberry standards in the north of Finland, which are decided on the basis of standards from other countries? You should not police the rules the way you do that. You should only police the joint rules when they have cross-border effects. And I think this is the only way you can reduce the number of laws. They have started the exercise with better regulation, where they'll go through them one by one, they will never finish. Barroso and Verheugen did the same exercise. They wanted to reduce the number of laws with 1/3 in 5 years. After 5 years, they had added 1/3 to the amount of legislation. Not because they wanted it, but because this is the way it works. And you cannot stop it by taking the legislative acts one by one. You need to change them on a wholesale basis. And I think Cameron can receive a signal in that direction. And the form of the agreement has already been settled, in my view. It will be a decision in the European Council to be imported in the next treaty change, which would mean that there would be no treaty change after the British referendum, but a protocol would be decided in the European Council. It will not formally be legally binding, but with the prospect that it will be entered in the treaty someday, the Commission will not police after another contract. So it will work in a legal form, and it will be rather easy to adopt. And that will be a nice new deal, and then it will end with a referendum where 62% of the British will vote yes.
Okay.
This question will be
Let's
Thanks.
finish on this very optimistic thing and see whether, first of all, Michael, whether you have 1 or 2 remarks, please.
Yes, I would very much like to respond. It's becoming a nice debate together. I follow you to a large degree, but I'll put down some markers. Now, one of your points was the commissioners get in there and they're told what to do by their staff. Well, commissioners sometimes come in knowing nothing about what they have to do. And so they do need serious and professional advice. Sometimes the commissioners are very able and strong and get a grip on their businesses. Take one example, Lord Caulfield in respect to the single market, where he got this very difficult subject by the scruff of the neck and changed the paradigm from harmonise everything into a lot of mutual recognition. That's just one example. But then there are other commissioners, some of them are, let us say, average quality politicians who do not successfully operate in this very difficult environment that you know very well. It's technically and politically difficult at the same time. And so to be a successful commissioner, you have to be a very, very talented guy. Right, that's one point. Now, but then the question is whether the amount of regulation going on is still too much or not, and whether the bureaucracy is something to be fought against, or whether they're moving with the new stream of ideas. First, objective fact. In the last years, in this century, after the big wave of single market legislation in the 1990s, basically, the number of new regulations coming out of Brussels has been a substantially declining trend. And it's about half what it was in the preceding decade. Maybe it's not enough for your book, but still there was a change there. And now we get into some of the you have to confront your argument with substantive cases, sector by sector. Now, you were talking a bit about Finnish strawberries and Polish slaughterhouses. Well, you remember last year there was a horse meat scandal in the whole of Europe, a pan-European horse meat scandal of Romanian horses that had been converted into I don't know, German and Dutch hamburgers without being properly labelled. Okay, huge scandal. What is the conclusion? The conclusion is that the implementation of basically correct food chain regulations at the European level were not being seriously implemented at the national level. And in other very important cases that we have to discuss now, certainly energy policy, digital policy, foreign policy, there European Union objectively should be doing more. The energy union, digital sector, that's actually on the agenda. But these are cases where you have to have more forceful European policies, I think, as a generally acceptable proposition. All right?
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Now, I'll open here. First, Annette down there.
Thank you. I'm Annette Vestergaard from the European Parliament's office in Copenhagen. Jens-Peter, you were very optimistic about the percentage that would vote yes in the British referendum. I just recently saw articles describing that might depend on the wording of the on the ballot sheet. Do you have any comments or experience or knowledge about what will the wording be? Because that is also something that could be interesting in the Danish context, where we also have an upcoming referendum. Yeah. Maybe the British ambassador could comment on that one as well. Thank you.
Yeah, just a minute. We just take the two other questions here. First, Vivian Life, British ambassador.
Yes, good morning, I'm Vivian, the British ambassador, and actually your conference has been more timely because I think 15 minutes ago the referendum bill was published in Parliament, and why I was partly rudely looking at my BlackBerry was I thought I might have this text. It will be out there absolutely imminently. The question I wanted to ask is, yes, Danish views do matter to us. That was why David Cameron had hoped to be having breakfast with Helle Thorning-Schmidt this morning. You've not done your role play, but imagining that conversation, where do you think there would be most common views between Denmark and Britain? Where might there be most difference? And where there are differences, what kind of things, what kind of arguments might persuade Denmark? Obviously, you don't know the full package. I don't know the full package that's on the table for negotiation. But from what you've been saying, perhaps you could give me some broad directions on those, not least because that's going to be my job for the next year at least. Thank you.
Thanks. Please.
Jimmy Miller from the European Movement as well. This is a question for you, Jeff, two-pronged question for you, Jens-Peter. You talked about the 164,000 legislative acts that are in the EU at the moment. Now, just quickly looking it up rudely on my phone as well, there are 67,000 legislative acts in Denmark alone. Seeing as Denmark is a very low-level legislative country, we don't have as many rules as other nations does. Is it natural that the EU would then have 164,000 acts to try to combine all these thousands and thousands of acts in other countries, and that message is the more important one when it comes to Brexit as well, not telling them there's a lot of acts, but telling them why these acts exist. As Michael Emerson just told us, these acts are fairly relevant to the British and are not to be
Can you
reformed.
make it short?
And shortly after, yes, forgot the second thing.
Okay.
Wasn't important then.
Okay. Thanks. Yes, please, Jens-Peter, you start, and Michael,
Yeah.
you come.
Since Cameron wished a yes, he will make a wording which is in favor of a yes, naturally. It's not a no man. I know the no man in Great Britain, and I know how they ate it, and did it all the time. So naturally, the framing of the question will be on continued membership and not on British entrance into the EU. Britain is a member. On what will Helle say to Cameron? He will give him some good advice on how to win against skeptics. She has a lot of experience in that. I have a very long range of experience in losing referendums as well, and I know to win a referendum does not happen from the strengths of the British no side. It does only happen by mistake on the yes side. So we won 2nd of June 92 and changed the direction of the EU. So we won on the Euro membership in the referendum in 2000. It was not our campaign, it was mistakes in the yes campaign. And it will not happen with London City behind a yes. So what I fear is something different, that Cameron does not put the arguments and the request good enough. He can get more than he will request. That's my risk. And I think Helle would tell him that he should not ask for treaty change, because treaty change may give new debates in Denmark, and that's what Helle is concerned about to avoid. Then on numbers, I agree in any modern society you need a help of standards, laws, verdicts, rules. I do not criticize the numbers, because for the 62,000 standards, the alternative would be 62 times 28 different national standards, or German standards, if we hadn't joint standards. So I do not protest the numbers or the procedures behind. What I protest, and what people hate, it's when they are policed in ways which is not acceptable for people. The 48 hours working directive in Great Britain. Why should it be a problem in Germany or France? It's not a problem. When Britain is very keen on that, or measures, there the Commission was clever. Barroso was clever and took away the Commission draft to overrule the British silly measures. But why should the European Commission involve themselves in such things? You need to have a borderline about cross-frontier effect or not. On the fruit standards, it's very nice to have a joint fruit scheme which is put into legal force by decisions of a wholesaler in Greece selling it to a wholesaler in Denmark. Then they know what these invisible strawberries is about. But to use it as a rule in the fruit market in Copenhagen makes no sense at all. So that's why I suggest a European Freedom Act where they give a possibility to derogate from lower standards for rich countries against the contribution to the budget. If we want to have a higher environmental standards in Denmark, we should have the right to insist on that, but pay for that so that there is no protectionist value in doing that. And from the poor countries, they should have a possibility not to implement the rules. Now, when they make sausages in the slaughterhouse in Krakow, they shall be able to continue to do that as long as they are sold in Poland. Only if they sell them in the British market or the Danish market, they must apply the joint standards. It's to have a more voluntary approach to the number of laws. You can make people satisfied everywhere. There's no other way to do it. And then on social tourism, I think the deal, the fair deal, is that in the northern countries, you have a right to restrict these benefits, but the price to be paid to the poorer countries in the east and in the south of Europe is a refocusing of structural funds, so that structural funds go to the south of Europe and to the east of Europe, and then we have the right to discriminate a little. We need that in Denmark with our special system. And this deal can also be part of a fair deal where they are not overruled by economic advantages to the north, but where it's seen as a fair deal for everyone. I think that's a solution, and I think that would be part of the fair deal, which will convince the British that there is no way out.
Okay, Michael, you had
Yes, I'd like to comment on some of your precise points, but I think here the issue was, if I understood it rightly, I'm not sure if I heard correctly, but what I got the question or the issue to be is, in the Cameron agenda, what can become something where there can be an alliance of many member states, and which are the issues which are going to be much more conflictual, part of the purpose of your... I mean, I think in the migration area, and in-work benefits and all of that, there are common concerns in here, Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, France, Sweden, UK. So there's something to be seriously discussed, while at the same time watching out that there are a large number of new member states who are watching this discrimination principle absolutely, and that has to be respected. Labour market area, there, I mean, we're discussing it here. Labour market area, I mean, there are, the UK would like to opt out more of the EU social agenda. That, and then you kind of sympathise with this. You could have more flexibility in detailed labour market regulations. It's a serious argument. By the way, completely contrary to one of the themes in the previous session, the supportive Europe should have stronger social consensus and commonality of social rules. So this is a very difficult issue indeed. But then coming to some of your points, and the Polish slaughterhouse and whether there can be more selectivity in the application. Well, one can look at that. Yes, up to a point in certain cases. That to say there is at the moment a big business, a regulated business, of identifying what regulations small and medium-sized enterprises can be exempt from. Okay, you could look at that, but I mean, you can't oversimplify it. One can look at it, and Timmermans is on to that. When you come to the Polish slaughterhouse, but this is a very nice case. Okay, you heard your speech, it sounds very reasonable, but then, okay, the stuff coming out of the Polish slaughterhouse, where is it going? Is that going into the local market or into across the border to Lithuania? And who is controlling where the flow of trade goes? So there you're introducing segmentation of the internal market in a bureaucratically complicated way. Now, it links very interestingly to the Ukraine question. This may seem surprising. The Ukraine Association Agreement, I know there was somebody from the Ukraine mission. Yeah, I don't know if he's still here. But anyway, Association Agreement, deep and comprehensive free trade agreement. Large chunks of the EU acquis is loaded into these new agreements. And so Ukrainian slaughterhouses, what about them? And they are much less well prepared for this. But here there is the principle of using the jargon compartmentalization. You can take a food chain from farm to fork, get it certified, and that is an island within the country. And that's probably a good idea for Ukraine to have some food chains that are export oriented, and the rest don't have to do it. But to do that within the European Union is a much more tricky proposition given the principles of the single market.
Okay, thank you. I think we have to stop now because there is lunch in the Lusthuset over there, and then you have to be back here at 1 o'clock precisely. Thanks a lot, both to Michael and to